day, everyone, and welcome to the integrative triangle. I prefer the integrative triangle: psychiatry, psychopharmacology, and neurobiology. I think is the future way to more effectiveness approach to the mental illness. I think is the way to turn the traditional point of treatment, the treatment of the symptoms, to another paradigm, to treat the causes and the symptoms together and in the durable and permanent way. In this section, we go to listen Dr. Mário David, on my right, a neuropsychanalyst, a psychiatrist, and a group analyst that will present us a neuroscientific hypothesis about certain interpsychic and interpersonal phenomena as new contributions to a neurodynamic understanding of the therapeutic groups. In other way, Dr. Aldo Lombardo is a psychiatrist and a director of a therapeutic community in Rome, and he also is a professor in university in Rome too. He will present us integrate sociotherapy, steps and schema therapy in a residential therapeutic community. Let's listen. Dr. Mário David, please.
Sorry about this, I'm just checking the right version. There were a lot previous versions before the final final version is going to be presented. So I'm very pleased with this gentle invitation in order to share with all of you some ideas and reflections about recent neuroscientific data from the studies of the brain concerning neurobiological phenomena about interpersonal and social levels that influences brains in interplay and interact from the perspective of someone who is a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, and a conductor in group analytic settings. That still marvels himself with the richness and complexity of mental processes and interpersonal process that emerges every time in those settings. On my last 16 years, I've been studying how it is possible to understand some phenomena that happens on the psychological and symbolical levels and translate them at the neurodynamic and neurobiological levels. It is a very hard quest that it is shared already with quite few people that I had the honor to meet in some investigation meetings, points, and forums like the Neuropsychoanalysis International Society and other societies, where neuroscientists, neuropsychoanalysts, and other investigations that I will make mention all along my speech, having done a pioneer breaking way out that allow us today to start to have a new refreshing understanding about our possibilities and imprintings on our psychotherapies and the more precise circumstances. And in this sense, I agree no more than what Luis Cozzolino says from Pepperdine Universities of St. Louis, United States, wrote in his book entitled Neuroscience of Psychotherapy, Healing the Social Brain, who considers that doing psychotherapies concerns, I quote, our capabilities to connect, tune, and adjust each one brain during early childhood and beyond that we have capabilities to cure each other through intimate and effective relationships that we can change. That means we can build and rebuild the neural structures, and from now on, we can say that psychotherapeutic interventions can be understood as neurobiological interventions involved in deeply cultural aspects of personal and collective history. Using evolution as an organizing principle and the bio-social psychological developmental model to explain how our highly social brains have been shaped by the natural selection and the pressure and competition of groups for survival, our social brains developed huge capacities in dealing with diverse biophysical environments and increased large social groups with the development of language, problem-solving, and abstract abilities and other capacities. As you know, at birth time, the human brain is organ almost finished as in embryological terms, but presents a huge functional immaturity. But this makes it deeply influenced to every external influences, in particular to the prolonged parental care, which will trigger profound learning process that will deposit and be stored in different layers of implicit and other memories, emotional memories. The functional immaturity is also open to potential specialization to design areas or neural systems at certain time frames that will open in a pre-programmed ways to carry out certain modification and structural connections, which are called sensitive periods, in order to acquire some core functions in performing needed tasks to his expected autonomy, such as walking, talking, reading, writing, and so on. Another neuroscientific information that is very important for us is that nowadays we know there is a widespread neuroplastic potential among the different brain cells, in particular the neurons and his terminal parts, axons, dendrites, and receptors, towards proliferation, differentiation, migration, even apoptosis and pruning, which are no more exclusive from childhood and adolescence, but also it can happen till very late in life. As a very well-known couple of neuroscientists, Rogers Rashamadran and Rashamadran, have stated that the human brain is capable of more and faster functional reorganization that we had thought about till now. This means that the brain has a very high capacity to retain, store, reframe, and reproduce huge quantities of information that stores and reframes again every time in a different way, using this incoming new information either from its inside milieu, the body, from previous emotional memories, implicit memories, previous emotional reactions, and a lot of other kind of informations, either from the physical and social environment, outside the environment. A recent paradigm shift have occurred with how we think the brain works, and this how the different systems process information, from the high levels, the cognitive and psychic levels, to the lower levels, the somatic, emotion, and affective. And these have been merged in the scientific field to neurobiological models about emotions and their impacting over the brain mental function. And this has made a huge difference about our understanding how the brain psychic function relates between cognitive and affective determinants. Who rules the brain? And I'm referring to a well-grounded neurobiological models, which are, the first I'm referring is Yak-Panksepp model. This is a very simple representation where he refers to 3 levels of processing, and you can see the core systems, the 7 affected circuits, and then he puts all these process, and then you see the secondary emotions, and then the mentalized and containing the higher psychic mental processing. From his book, The Affective Neurosciences, from '98, and then a lot of huge articles, and he has a huge collaboration with Solms and so on. He sees more or less, and I try to resume his theory. He has this 7 emotion operation system. Some has positive valence that I show you another scheme are represented in red, that has the seeking, the lust, the care, and the play, that emerge from deep subcortical circuitry, and they are controlled bottom up, they go up out from learning, and they are modulated by the second process. These second process are mainly limbic, and they are influenced by the social context, and another level that influenced by thoughts and ruminations. And there is another group that is mainly functioning as a negative valence emotions that is represented in purple, that is rage, fear, and panic, grief, that emerge from the tertiary process, the cognitions. And this is largely neocortical. This is the representation that he published in several papers. This is coming from the Feeling Brain, book published by Mark Solms, his last book, with his selected papers on neuropsychoanalysis from '95. As you see, there is this 3 levels of processing when he shows how these things rule. And there's this secular influence and regulations. So for Yak-Panksepp, the brain-mind works at 3 levels, and he calls these 3 levels that are, as I explained you, are bottom-up and top-down conditioned responses. Another model is, as in Portugal is very known, António Damasio, with a large community of researchers that propose a model that has connections with the model of Yak-Panksepp, but this is I would call a motion topographic system, where he says that each basic emotion, induces a multitude of significant body maps of higher complexity, that is secondary emotions and sentiments. And this functions in his model as each fine sentiment needs a bodily map. And it means that to understand each feeling, we have to understand what it means in our body. And this reminds a lot of Freud's ideas and other psychoanalysis. Another thing that is very important to understand how the mind works is the importance of emotional communication. And this Alan Shore, Daniel Siegel, and Vivian Green have wrote very interesting books, and they say mainly that the non-conscious communication are something that they occur between the neurophysiological process and the dynamics of interpersonal reactions. And this occurs on brain circuits that are responsible by the social perception. And this is what it means. This means that one of the parts that the brain functions, the brain functions in several ways. And one of the ways we can call social brain. Also, there's been studies that, as psychotherapists, this is obvious, that it happens when you are near each other, that there is something happening. And this is some information that scientifically there's been effects on electric activity on each brain separately. In close ranges, also there is regulators that are sensitive to tactile stimulation, to warmth, to touch, and also this happens, or these are extremely important when are between significant relationships, for example, parents and children. But also is possible in longer physical distance through verbal and non-verbal. Non-verbal is behavior, gestures, response. And this, what happens, what's important is the voice tone, the gesture, the time response, and this is very important, and this is reacted by the brain social validation centers. So what happens is that our brain is social, is very sensitive to interpersonal experience, and our brain is prepared for that. It's not isolated brain, and this is been already proved and studied. And this is one of the most forces that structure and alters our brain. So this is proves that, this, in my opinion, proves that psychotherapy is a neurobiological tool that we have. But there is other data that we need time. So, and you will see in my propositions, it's believed that it needs time, especially in classical, for instance, for psychoanalysis, think that it needs at least 2 years. But if you use activated therapies, maybe it's enough lesser time. If you use touch and other techniques, maybe you can use lesser time. So the idea is that it's very important that in the interactions that you are using, the effective dimensions of the therapies is the central organizer of the brain psychic. So cognitive interactions or trends is not so, because what happens, the newity is the, Jaap Panksepp says we have in our brain our evolution, and we have all the story of the world. So we have inside our dinosaurs, and our dinosaurs are their basic emotions. And our dinosaurs, they walk very slowly, but they are powerful. And the tip-top troughs, the virgin forests that are our feelings, and the little monkeys that go, and the little honeybee birds and butterflies, they are fragile, and they can be destroyed by one of these T-Rex that go around. by, for instance, aggressivity. So, after this very quick and large review, but about some pertinent and recent areas of neuroscientific data, I consider that I have some fundamentation to propose some working hypotheses for future investigation that could bridge information conveyed from these neuroscientific fields. So, one idea is that long-term effects of psychotherapy, either individual or group, are due mainly to emotional events and interactions that happen in each part involved during the process. What happens in the therapy, in the patient and in therapists. What happens in terms of emotion or in each member of the group. Another thing is if you are able to induce modifications on the mental elaboration and the psychic awareness, this is concerning the problem of conscience. That's another issue very important that I have not speaking here. I mean developing in the mind of our patients what I call, because I'm a psychoanalyst, analytic function. I think this has to be in affective terms. And this is more stimulant and challenge for the patient than the cognitive aspects. What it means is this. I'm more convinced that the technique of psychoanalysis is just an emotional therapy. Transference, conscious transference is an emotional therapy, and it grounds on that. And I'll tell you something. It's not my idea. It's from Psalms. Psalms says that in conscience is more conscience than we think ever now. He has a paper that I consider as radical on his ideas, that he says the id knows more than ego admits. The ego is more unconscious. He doesn't know much about himself. What you are helping to the people is that they have to understand what ego is doing, because ego is not totally conscious. What we know about ourselves is what you are feeling every time. But this is another discussion, very interesting. And this is based, he says this based on neuroscientific basis. Another proposition is that if submitting people to psychotherapy process, if it means, the question is, it means that will increase expansion of emotional resilience and cognitive reserve on the brains of our patients. I think it's an area very important to investigate, and also this issue that we should study if you do long-term process, either individual or in group, if the results on long term would be better than therapies of lesser duration. And finally, just to finalize my presentation, I would like to share something that makes me a lot of sense, besides that idea of Psalms, that I have put away from this presentation because I was afraid to be too long. That is the proposition of our fellow colleague, psychotherapist, psychoanalyst, and group analyst from Hungarian origin, Tom Ormei, that he wrote a very interesting book called Social Nature of Persons, who states that one person is no person. There is nothing, one person doesn't exist in psychic situation. So he proposes that there is a huge conflict in our minds between our needs of identity, difference and similarity and relationship, between the selfish and aggressive ego that relies that I'm different from you, but tamed by a superego and id, and this one, who is linked to our intrinsic social nature, that is deeply imprinted in our neural architecture of human brain that I have been demonstrating. And what he makes new is that maybe there is an existence of a new autonomous psychic structure that he calls nous, a Latin expression that refers meaning us, that will emerge also from a part of this id, and this he has a topograph function to connect. That is why we have this natural nature to connect in larger unities, in families, in working groups, in society. So he boosts the psychic to be in relation.
Is to find ways to go within and try to reorganize his memories, his styles of self-regulation, and create new meanings for him, new ways to understand his or her life circumstances, and how he or she can dream about themselves. Thank you very much for listening to me, and for here you can see our mind references that I've used to make this video.
What we do is to find ways to go within and try to reorganize his memories, his styles of self-regulation, and create new meanings for him, new ways to understand his or her life circumstances, and how he or she can dream about themselves.
And now
Very much
we go to listen.
for me, and for here you can see our mind references that I have used to make this paper.
Okay. I want to thank Mário David for two reasons. First, because of this nice summary of very important and recent information about the brain development. The second is because you helped me out. You simplified my presentation because it's complementary to what you say. I'm referring to treatment recovery of borderline personality disorder, who really are the result of a lack of a mothering, of let's say they don't find a good enough environment to stimulate all the things that you have highlighted in instinctual needs and cravings. So my presentation is about borderline personality needs, ways to unlearn dysfunctional mental schemas, and a better way to speed up recovery. So if you see, this is a list, and you will forget, but it's just an idea to say that there is a person who is called Jeffrey Young, who worked out the basic needs of a child. Now, if these needs are met by the environment, the carer, the mother, whoever, then the person develops a secure attachment, which is the basic sort of a balancer, let's say, of the development of the brain. Now, this is what might happen if. Sorry. This is I don't know how to start it, but okay, maybe like this. Yes. Can't we? We can't hear it.
As you can see, one time the baby was young, his mother got angry. And another time the mother got more upset than the baby.
You scared me. I'm terrible at that.
By doing that, whether she meant to or not, the message that mom gave was that their own needs were more important than her baby's.
Okay. So, can you hear me well? Can you hear? It's okay. So, where does he go? You see, when this is a mother who doesn't understand the child's needs. And what happens, actually we were saying there are two kinds of mothers. Winnicott was saying there is a libidinal mother and a mother environment, which is the way mother responds to the basic needs of her child. Now, where do they go? This goes to the right hemisphere, just to clarify, obviously also in other parts of the brain, but they're mainly registered for the first 3 years of life, when the right hemisphere is dominant. They're all registered in a kind of disorganized, not integrated ways. And so this is what might happen when mother or the environment doesn't satisfy baby's need. There could be abandon, emotional deprivation, defectiveness, and so on and so forth. When the left side of the brain matures, then there are certain beliefs, negative beliefs, and autonomic negative thoughts that associate with this pattern, with these schemas. And a therapy that is called schema therapy has now found a way to deal with modifying this imprinting, which is, we cannot go into it, but I wanted just to hint it to you so that you understand why we have decided to introduce this part or this form of therapy in our approach. In fact, this kind of schemas are like thorns, are like pins, nails that offend the brain, which in turn tries to protect itself along the amygdala responses, fight, flight, or freeze. And these are, well, we cannot go into it, but I mean, this is an idea. I want to give you an idea of how certain part of our personalities develop since from the very beginning of our interaction with the carer. So in the end, we end up with two kinds of borderline personality disorder, which are the consequences of an hypercompensation to these forms of hurt, emotional hurt, surrender, or avoidance. So what do we, is it clear to you? Yeah? Can you understand me? Right? Okay. Now, what do we understand as personality disorder? Which has been defined as a pervasive pattern of unstable interpersonal relationship, unstable self-image, unstable affects, moods, and marked impulsivity. So, really, we have three clusters of problems, of areas, which can become the target of our intervention. And in my experience, I realized that if we deal only with one cluster, we miss out on others. And so the best way is to hit them, the three, together. And that's why we think that the best approach for borderline with severe problems, just to understand severe problems regards those group of borderline who are not too well to stay out of hospital, but they are too well to be in hospital. You know, it's a kind of revolving door sort of group of patients. So, how do we do it? Well, this is just a brief idea, just a brief scheme of what happens in our brain when we are under stress or under the domain of emotional situation. When we have the other part of the brain, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, then our moods, our emotions can be controlled. But what happens is really that normally where one prevails, let's say if I'm counting, and counting while I'm breathing, I activate the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which can dominate the impulsive emotional response to an emotional reasoning. So, is psychoanalysis the answer? Well, it could be, but it's very difficult to treat a patient who can see in a state of dependency the carer as a potential enemy. Therefore, it's got to either idealize the carer or just avoid connecting. So the answer is group, as Mario was saying, for several reasons. Now, but the best way, I believe, to hit the three cluster area is sociotherapy. What happens in sociotherapy is that the four social instincts that Mario was talking about, they're all activated at the same time because there is attachment in time, of course. There is caring with one another. There is a cooperation, and there's a competition to see who is the person that deserves more authority among the peer group. For example, the senior patients who are growing up and maturing. So what happens, what makes, which is the tool of sociotherapy, is the community meeting, because there is empowerment of the members who are just the same as our speaker was saying about the 388 this morning. Yeah? There are democratic choices, and there is a possibility of reading what happens in the whole environment, so that the environment can be kept safe, stable, and things that happen can be read, understood. The three things that make a good sociotherapy, so that therapeutic environment, is empathy, norms, and connection. If these are carried on in parallel, it is possible to confront one another, and confrontation leads to a new identity. Okay. So, in fact, as time goes by, action becomes habit, which becomes schema, character trait, relations with other beliefs and emotions, thoughts, action. This circle can be interrupted by new norms, new roles, okay, which then makes a person become a member of this group, of this culture, that will help the person to feel ready to be confronted once he leaves the community. There's a lot to say about this, because people might say sometimes, of course, the person is okay with, as long as he lives in a therapeutic community. As soon as he comes out, then he's lost. In fact, if we use the responsibility and empowerment and democratic choices and confrontation, person is well equipped to feel that he can cope with crisis once he's out of the community. So to sum up, this is what happens when a dysfunctional user with his own schemas, negative dysfunctional schema, enters a community. And obviously he enters a group which has rules, a setting, a new roles, functional roles, which make the environment predictable, safe, empathetic, stable. And to learn new rules means to learn new ways to perceive and behave and think and feel when one is with others. And obviously a setting defines boundaries, things that can be done and things that cannot be done. So the omnipotent, childish way of thinking is very much limited, reduced, and the person grows up. To give you an idea of what happens, for people who come with the idea they are loner, alone, they cannot trust anybody, very hungry for attention. This is what happens in the therapeutic community. Let me see. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm very sorry. Oh, I think I need help here. This is the difference between the normal person on where is it? On your left, and that's the right, the borderline on the right. This means that this cortex, his cortex, needs more training to learn to cope, new ways to coping. So how do we do this? Okay, this is steps. This is a program started by Nancy Bloom, American, which stands for systems training. In other words, to give teaching to not only to a patient, but to all people who live around him, for emotional predictability. In other words, to learn to recognize what might trigger off an episode of an intensity, high emotional intensity, and problem solving, and learn to deal with it. It's an evidence-based treatment, as you see is the last one, together with so many other 6 at least. And it's a group format, a psychotherapy educational approach, basically. And it's based on a manual. This is the manual, can be bought by, it's a CD that you can buy from internet. I translated it into Italian, but it could be easily translated into Portuguese, I'm sure. But this is what it does. So, can you see? Oh yeah, it's very good, better than I thought. So, if you see the triangle on the left side is the cortex control power. Normally, you see, if we have an episode, normal people, we can go high. This is on the yellow side is where our primitive animal responses may take place. Okay, so if we are very, very angry, sometimes we may enter this area, this zone, but we can quickly, hopefully, return to the baseline. For the borderline, is different because he has a different baseline. You see, of tension. It's always tense, and it's very when he's stressed. It doesn't go back, return to the baseline quickly. It takes time. In the meantime, another episode can occur. So in the end, he spends a long time in this area, suffering. And if he finds, let's say, drugs, sex, or whatever might make his emotional intensity drop, then he would become addicted to this, would carry on looking for it. But what steps does is that he tries to stop. You see with these blue arrows, it teaches a person to stop its intensity, emotional intensity, to reach the yellow zone. And it does it by teaching to detach, to recognize the maladaptive schema that are activated together with the automatic negative thoughts, which can be challenged during the training. It teaches to breathe, counting, and to distract, to have images, to train himself to direct his mind towards pleasant or favorable memories that a person has, which calm him down. And all this is nothing new, because they borrow this from DBT, mindfulness, schema therapy. So, but the good thing about STEPS is the fact that it has been organized into a kind of curriculum teaching for borderline patients of 20 lessons. The first, I'll show it to you. The first lesson 10 lessons teach you to deal with emotional intensity, and teaches you to distance, they communicate, put words. Usually people are alexithyming. They think that they feel different, but they bring with them the tool that is called steps. Steps is the tool that make them feel always capable of controlling, being in control of their fears, of their anger, and their impulsivity. Thank you very much.